Staff at British nursery schools, as well as registered childminders, could soon be required to report on toddlers who show signs of becoming future terrorists. It's apparently part of the UK's new sweeping anti-terror bill, which some have condemned as draconian. Here is what's proposed. Senior management and governors should make sure that their staff can identify children at risk of being drawn into terrorism. They should also be able to refer children and young people for further help. The government says that it wants children to understand, quote, fundamental British values in an age-appropriate way. We can get more on this now by speaking to terrorism expert Dr. Doug Weeks, who joins us on the line. Dr. Weeks, welcome. My first instinct, I have to be honest, when I saw this story was I couldn't quite believe it. Maybe there's more to it, though, than I realised. I mean, what do you think of this idea of toddlers becoming terrorists?
Well, I would have to say, first of all, thank you for having me on RT today. But I would have to say, first of all, that this is not necessarily particularly surprising that the government is going down this route. This is actually something that they've pursued for a number of years now. Most recently, with regards to a program called RAP, or Raising Awareness Against or About Prevention. Raising awareness about prevent. And the government has for many years actually tried to engage its statutory partners in trying to report on issues that they feel are perhaps critical in safeguarding young people. So it's not anything that is particularly new.
I'm sure everybody would like children to be safe. Is it appropriate, though, to be targeting children with counter-terrorism efforts?
Well, as I said initially, I think this is a bit overreactive, to be quite honest with you, and certainly at this age group. To rely on school teachers and others to try and identify the things that they might be concerned about with regards to thinking that these kids are going to grow up to be terrorists raises a whole litany of issues, not the least of which is what training are they going to be providing in order to make those assumptions, and how is the reporting going to be done, how would ultimately that be handled by the government, are we really going to put SO15 officers on cases involving 4-year-olds to determine whether or not they're being radicalized. I think that there are many, many questions that would have to be answered on this.
Now, in order for this entire concept to work, it would mean that you to see the telltale signs of somebody becoming a terrorist. What are those signs?
Well, that's, I think, the million-dollar question right there. In terms of academic research, there's been a tremendous amount of research that has gone into the concepts of radicalization, terrorism, extremism, trying to define not only what those terms actually mean, but also to define the social and psychological elements that ultimately propel people down those pathways. The literature from those that study this has been inconclusive in terms of being able to identify what those very traits are. In fact, they are generally seen to be unique in every single case where there are not identifiable traits that can be tracked, and thus it becomes very problematic at that point.
Yeah, presumably this isn't the case of the British government having too much time on their hands. They must feel that this is a genuine concern. I mean, how does the data read? How young can people be radicalised?
Well, I've never seen any reports on exactly how young people can be when they are radicalized. But I think and a more appropriate comment here would be even the definitions that the British government uses in terms of what is radicalization, what is extremism, are inherently problematic. The government in their contest policy essentially says that radicalism always leads to extremism, and extremism always to violence. And even internal documents within the government say that that is simply not true. The values that the government promotes also are inherently put into those definitions, and they themselves become inherently problematic in trying to define what radicalism actually is, whether it's pejorative or not. And as we know, radicalism has been a part of every society since time began. And in fact, in many ways, that is how societies change, for better or for worse. So I think that there's a lot more that has to be done in terms of trying to define this in a more neutral and a more nuanced way that brings greater understanding to it, rather than just simply associating radicalism with violence and making it problematic.
Really interesting to get your take on this story. Thanks so much for coming on to speak to us. That was terrorism expert Dr. Doug